Around 10 million years ago, animals across the Americas were beginning to migrate and colonize new lands. From South America, ground sloths, terror birds, armadillos, and more were beginning to migrate north to North America. Alongside these northbound giants was a prickly little tree dweller suited for life in the jungle canopies of what would eventually become the Amazon rainforest. While it faced many difficulties migrating north, it persevered, eventually evolving into today's North American porcupine. While the story itself seems simple, the journey of figuring it out has been very difficult. How exactly did porcupines migrate into North America and survive in such a drastically different environment? Scientists are still working to figure this out, and a recent discovery from Florida seems to be providing some answers, but the answers that we're finding are a lot more interesting than we originally hoped for. Deciphering the evolutionary history of North America's porcupine and how it exactly came to live on the continent has historically been very difficult. And this is because there isn't a whole lot of evidence in the fossil record for North American porcupine evolution. There are other places, like in South America, where we actually have a really good understanding of porcupine evolution. But the difference between South America and North America is that there are a lot more porcupine species in South America. Today, there are 16 extant species, whereas North America only has the one. Now, we know that the North American porcupine came from ancestors that came from South America, and genetic analysis suggests that the lineage of North American porcupine started around 10 million years ago. But other context clues in the fossil record suggest a much more recent appearance from about 2.5 million years ago. But this new fossil does shed a little bit more light on how exactly North America got its single porcupine species. The evolutionary history of porcupines is already really interesting. We know they started in Africa roughly 30 million years ago, where they then spread into Asia and Europe, and are now collectively known as the Old World porcupines. But they then migrated into South America, likely through a process known as rafting. This process itself is already really interesting. Back around 30 million years ago, South America and Africa, while close together, were still separated by the ever-growing Atlantic Ocean. So the only way the African porcupines could get to South America is if they hitched rides on floating debris, known as rafts, and survived all the way until they hit the mainland of the continent. And these ocean travelers were actually the first rodents to step foot into South America, and here they exploded and thrived, diversifying into several groups that we know very well today, including guinea pigs, chinchillas, capybaras, and what are now known as the New World porcupines. As an interesting side note, some of these rodent descendants actually became really large. Extinct relatives of capybaras actually grew to the size of cows back then. But the descendants that became our modern-day South American porcupine stayed relatively small and became really well adapted to living in the trees. And they have a couple of adaptations that help them live in the trees, including a prehensile tail to hold onto branches to help them reach high-hanging fruit, as well as long fingers equipped with blunt sickle-shaped claws for gripping the bark. And because they don't have to worry about being cold living in the South American jungles, they really focused on defense on an evolutionary level. They have thick, overlapping layer of quills to help ward off predators. But despite the fact that they had a really good track record of spreading through both the Old World and moving into the New World, porcupines were reaching a dead end in South America. At the time, of course, South America was an island continent, completely cut off from the rest of the world. But that all changed around 5 million years ago when the Isthmus of Panama formed, cutting off the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and finally connecting the continents of North and South America. This set off a chain reaction of mass migrations both from the north and from the south in what's known as the Great American Interchange. Animals from both continents started crossing through this new land bridge to colonize the new continents, and from the north side, animals were doing really well. Prehistoric elephants, saber-toothed cats, llamas, jaguars, deer, they were all doing really well, adapting to the much warmer South American continent. But the South American animals were really struggling to gain footholds in North America. Some species, like the terror birds, were able to gain footholds, and ground sloths moved into North America and really did a good job taking over. But most of the animals struggled to adapt to the different environments, like deserts, grasslands, and cold temperate forests compared to their tropical forests. And the lineages that did establish footholds in North America, most of them didn't last very long. Today, there are only 3 lineages from South America on the North American continent, including the 9-banded armadillo, the opossum, and the North American porcupine. One of the biggest challenges that the South American lineages had to face moving into North America was the vastly different environments that the continent had compared to the southern one. For porcupines that evolved to live in the trees of the South American jungles, living in the trees of North America proved to be a really big challenge because the North American forests are temperate forests. They are much colder overall, and they have long periods of dormancy during the wintertime. The biggest change that they went through was trading out their dense layer of overlapping quills, which were really good for protection, but not good for insulation, with a thick layer of fur and shorter needle-like quills that could be raised when they felt threatened, which allowed them to stay insulated and warm during the cold winter months. They also had to change their diets, which changed their jaw structure. During the wintertime, there really isn't a whole lot to eat except tree bark, and so the porcupines evolved to be able to cut through the outer layer of tree bark to feed on the soft inner bark. While it's not great food, it's enough to keep animals going in the wintertime, and the porcupines were able to adapt to this and developed teeth and jaws that were better at grinding food rather than chewing on the soft fruits and leaves of the South American jungles. They also completely changed their lifestyle. North American porcupines are no longer very arboreal compared to their South American cousins. They spend a lot of their time on the ground, they've lost their prehensile tails, but they're not very good at moving on the ground. They can only move about 2 miles an hour. They are also still able to climb. They're just not very good at it. There's a lot of museum specimens that showed fractured bones from porcupines that likely fell from climbing trees. Now, all of these adaptations in the North American porcupine lineage can be seen in the fossil record. The problem is there aren't a whole lot of fossils in the fossil record showing these changes. The fossils that we do have are mostly of the teeth and jaw bones, and the jaw bones are often fragmentary, and most of them are lumped into the South American lineages. The ones that are lumped into the North American lineages tend to lack the physical characteristics that give us a clear understanding of how exactly the North American porcupine evolved from its South American ancestors. And that's where this new Florida specimen comes into play, because it is exceptionally well preserved and nearly 100% complete, with limbs, the backbone, a lot of the tail. It gives scientists a very good opportunity to study the evolution of North American porcupines. And the resulting study of this specimen yielded some very interesting results. The specimen, which has been given the name of Erythizon poieri, still has a prehensile tail, and it lacks the bark-gnawing jaw structure of the North American porcupine. This means it was more closely related to the South American porcupines than the North American one, but it still had similarities to North American porcupines, including the shape of the overall middle ear bone, as well as the shape of the front and back teeth. All of the data that was gathered led to the same consistent set of results. The specimen belongs to an extinct species of North American porcupine with an ancestral lineage that likely dates back to before the formation of the Isthmus of Panama 5 million years ago. But there are still several unanswered questions. Mainly, how many species are in this new group of North American porcupine, and why exactly did they go extinct, but the single lineage of porcupine that we have still exists in North America today? And then one more big question that this specimen raises is it a direct ancestor to North American porcupines today, or is it a separate group that moved into North America alongside the ancestral lineage of today's North American porcupine? We're not sure on that yet. We're going to need more fossils to answer that question. It's actually entirely possible that North America actually saw 2 lineages of porcupines migrate into North America. One that's represented by this specimen into the Gulf Coast, and one that moved into the West Coast that eventually evolved into today's porcupine. But that's what makes paleontology so much fun. We can answer questions and get more at the same time, and future discoveries will allow us to learn even more about the history of life on this planet.